At the most glittering ball in England, Duke Alexander Sterling looked down at Martha Bell, the fat kitchen maid with coal on her cheeks, rough hands, and a dirty apron stretched over her heavy body, and ordered her cast out before the crown. The noble ladies laughed behind their silk fans. Lady Evelina smiled, as if a servant ash shame were the finest entertainment of the evening. Even the footmen looked away while Martha lowered her eyes and walked toward the door, carrying every insult in silence. But just as the crown's envoy demanded the ancient Sterling Anthem, the polished singers failed, the musicians froze, and the entire ballroom trembled on the edge of royal disgrace. Then from the shadowed doorway where she had been thrown away like kitchen rubbish, Martha began to sing. One low, pure note cut through the chandeliers, the perfume, the whispers. And the cruelty, the crown's envoy turned pale. The Duke rose from his chair, for hidden inside that forgotten song was a cipher, a buried crime, and the proof that the woman they mocked as a coal-stained burden was the only honest voice in the room. Chapter 1. The coal-stained maid beneath the ballroom. By the time the first carriages began rolling toward Sterling House, the kitchen below stairs had already become a furnace of smoke. Steam, shouting, and fear. Coal burned red in the great iron range. Grease spat from roasting pans. Copper pots shook on their hooks whenever a kitchen boy slammed through the passage with another basket of bread or another crate of wine. Above them, the ballroom was being dressed for the crown's envoy with white roses, gold candles, polished mirrors, and silk-covered chairs. But beneath those shining floors, Martha Bell stood with coal dust on her cheek, flour on her sleeves, and a heavy black scuttle biting into both of her rough hands. She was short, broad, and soft-bodied, with a stained apron stretched over her heavy waist and a servant's cap pinned too tightly over dark hair damp from heat. Her face, if anyone had paused long enough to look past her body, carried a quiet, wounded beauty. Full cheeks, a soft mouth, and deep brown eyes that seemed to take in every insult without giving one back. But no one in the Sterling kitchen looked at Martha that way. They saw only the fat maid, the slow maid, the coal maid, the girl useful for lifting what others did not wish to touch. "Move, Martha," Clara hissed as she swept past, with a tray of sugared almonds. Clara was slender, pretty, and proud of both facts. "You block the passage like a cupboard." A kitchen boy laughed. And Bess, another maid, added, "A cupboard may be opened, Clara. Martha only stands there and breathes." Martha lowered her eyes and shifted the scuttle closer to the range. The coal inside clattered like stones in a grave. She had learned that silence was safer than reply. If she answered, they called her insolent. If she cried, they called her weak. If she defended herself, they laughed harder. So she carried, scrubbed, lifted, fetched, and endured. Her hands had grown cracked from winter water and blackened from coal. Yet those same hands never dropped a tray, never spoiled a dish. Never struck back. Mrs. Vale, the housekeeper, entered with her keys rattling at her waist and her mouth already tightened with anger. "Martha, after you feed that range, you will fetch the cold trays and take them to the side corridor outside the ballroom. You will not enter unless ordered. You will not speak to guests. You will not look at ladies directly. And for heaven's sake, wipe your face. His Grace will not have kitchen filth wandering under the eyes of the crown." Clara smiled. Then perhaps Martha should be hidden in the coal cellar until morning. Bess covered her mouth, or mistaken for part of the supper. "The roast pig has competition tonight." The laughter spread through the kitchen, quick and cruel. Martha bent to pour coal into the range. Heat struck her face. Sparks leapt against her sleeve. One spark burned the back of her hand, but she swallowed the pain and kept working. Mrs. Vale saw the flinch and said coldly, "Do not start sniveling." "We have no time for tenderness," Martha answered softly. "I am not sniveling, Mrs. Vale." The kitchen quieted at once. Clara's eyebrows rose. Mrs. Vale stepped closer. "What was that?" Martha kept her eyes down. "Only that I am not crying." For a moment the housekeeper seemed offended less by the words than by the calmness of them. "Do not mistake patience for virtue. Girl, you are kept here because you are strong enough for ugly work and plain enough to stay unnoticed. Remember that." Martha nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Vale." The words were obedient, but they did not stop the small ache that opened inside her chest. She was used to being mocked for her body. She was used to being told that she took up too much space. But tonight the cruelty felt sharper because the whole house was shining for people who would never know the weight of coal in their hands. Above stairs, ladies would glide beneath chandeliers in silk and diamonds. Their gloves would be soft. Their voices would be praised even when they said nothing kind. Martha would remain near the wall. smelling of smoke no matter how hard she scrubbed. She lifted the empty scuttle, set it aside, and went through the narrow passage toward the cold room, away from the kitchen. The house changed, the roar of the range dulled behind her. The stone walls were damp and cold. From above came the faint sound of violins rehearsing in the ballroom. Martha slowed despite herself. The melody drifting down through the corridor was the Sterling Anthem, the ancient ceremonial song chosen whenever the house wished to display loyalty to the crown. The musicians played it beautifully. But wrong. The second phrase was too quick, the Latin line was clipped. Most important, the final descent was missing entirely. Martha stopped with one hand on the cold room door. Her mother's voice rose in memory as clearly as if Agnes Bell stood beside her in the passage. "Not like that, my dove. Truth must be given air, or it suffocates." Martha's lips parted before she could stop them. She hummed the missing line under her breath, low and pure, shaping the old words almost silently. "Aurum non coronum servat." Gold does not preserve the crown. That line has not been sung in this house for 40 years. Martha turned so quickly her shoulder struck the wall. At the bend of the passage stood Duke Alexander Sterling. He wore black evening clothes, though not yet the full ornaments of the ball. And his tall figure seemed to bring the cold authority of the upper world down into the servants' corridor. His face was severe, handsome in a hard and unsmiling way, and his grey eyes fixed on Martha with unnerving attention. She dropped into an awkward curtsy. "Nearly losing her balance, Your Grace. Forgive me, I did not know anyone was there." Alexander did not dismiss her at once. His gaze moved from the coal smear on her cheek to her stained apron, then to her rough hands, and finally to her eyes. "Your name, Martha Bell, Your Grace." Something changed in his expression, so slight another man might have missed it. But Martha saw it and felt fear tighten around her ribs. "Bell," he repeated. "Who taught you that version of the anthem?" Martha's hands folded before her apron. "No one, Your Grace. I must have heard it somewhere. Where, I do not remember." Servants often remember gossip with perfect accuracy. "Strange that you should forget a forbidden line of Latin." She lowered her head. "I am only a kitchen maid, Your Grace. That," Alexander said quietly, "is precisely why I am asking." Before Martha could answer, silk whispered at the far end of the passage. Lady Evelina Blackthorne appeared in pale blue satin, diamonds trembling at her ears and a perfumed handkerchief in one gloved hand. She stopped when she saw Martha standing before the Duke. Her beautiful mouth curved, but there was no warmth in it. "Alexander, the guests are gathering. Surely you do not intend to spend the evening interrogating the kitchen furniture?" Martha's face burned. She curtsied. "My lady." Evelina ignored the greeting and looked her over slowly. Coal on the cheek, grease on the apron, and now music in the corridor. How ambitious. "Tell me, girl, do they let you sing to the pots below stairs or only to frighten the mice?" Clara and Bess had followed at a distance with trays and now stood listening. Clara's smile widened. Martha kept silent, but Evelina stepped closer, her perfume cutting through the smell of coal on Martha's sleeves. "What were you singing?" "Nothing of importance, my lady. Nothing of importance is exactly what I expected." Evelina turned to Alexander. "You see the danger of allowing servants too near grand occasions. They hear a note, repeat it badly, and soon imagine themselves heroines of some tragic chapel tale." Alexander's eyes remained on Martha. "Do you imagine yourself a heroine?" he asked. The question was cold but not careless. Martha looked at him once, and in that brief glance he saw no vanity, no pleading, no vulgar hunger for notice. Only exhaustion and a kind of dignity that did not know where to stand in a house built to crush it. "No, Your Grace," she said. "I imagine myself useful." Evelina laughed softly. "How touching then be useful elsewhere. The crown's envoy will arrive within minutes, and the last thing Sterling House requires is a coal-stained maid haunting the music corridor." Alexander's face hardened, whether from pride, suspicion, or the presence of Evelina. "Martha could not tell," he said. "Return below, Martha Bell. Do not sing in the passages again." The command struck her like a public slap, though the corridor held only a few witnesses. Clara lowered her eyes to hide her delight. Bess shifted the tray in her hands. Evelina smiled as if order had been restored. Martha curtsied. "Yes, Your Grace." She turned away before her face could betray her, but as she passed, Alexander spoke in a lower voice, meant only for her. A kitchen maid should not know dead songs. Martha did not stop. "Perhaps dead songs remember the poor better than the living do, Your Grace." The words were out before she could call them back. The corridor fell silent. Martha expected dismissal. Punishment, perhaps even instant disgrace. But Alexander said nothing. She continued toward the kitchen with her heart beating hard enough to hurt. Behind her, Evelina's voice sharpened. Did she just answer you? Alexander replied too softly for Martha to hear. Whatever he said made Evelina fall quiet. When Martha returned below, Mrs. Vale demanded where she had been. And Clara happily supplied the answer before Martha could speak. She was speaking with His Grace in the upper passage. Singing too, the kitchen erupted in whispers. Mrs. Vale's face went pale with rage. You foolish girl. Do you know who comes tonight? The Crown Envoy. Half the county, Lady Evelina, Lord Percival. If His Grace complains that you pushed your dirty face before him, you will be out before dawn, Martha said. I did not push myself before him, Clara laughed. No, you only sang like a dying cow until he noticed. Mrs. Vale seized Martha's cap and pinned it tighter. Scraping her scalp, you will carry the pheasant tray to the side corridor, hand it to the footman and stand in the shadow. If anyone speaks to you, you answer only what is necessary. If anyone laughs, you accept it. If anyone insults you, you accept that too. That is the difference between servants who survive and servants who think too highly of themselves. Yes, Mrs. Vale, Martha said. Her voice did not shake, though something inside her had begun to. She lifted the great silver pheasant tray when ordered. It was heavy enough that the young footman beside her winced when he tested one handle. But Martha took the full weight without complaint. Clara led the procession upstairs with wine. Bess followed with sweets. Martha climbed behind them, step by step. Feeling heat from the roasted birds rise into her face and pain throb in her burned hand. At the top of the servants' stairs, the world changed again. The smell of coal gave way to roses. Wax, champagne, and French perfume. Music floated from the ballroom. Silk skirts whispered beyond the open doors. Martha stood in the side corridor and handed off the heavy tray. The footman who received it muttered, "Devil that weighs more than a child." Martha only stepped back into the shadow where she had been told to belong, through the open doors. She saw Duke Alexander beside Lady Evelina. He stood tall and cold beneath the chandeliers, every noble in the room bending toward him as if his silence were a form of power. Then the herald announced the arrival of the crown's envoy, and the laughter thinned at once. A stern man in black and gold entered, bowed to Alexander, and after a few formal words requested the ancient Sterling Anthem before supper as a sign of loyalty to the crown. Martha's blood turned cold. The musicians lifted their instruments. Lady Evelina smiled confidently. Lord Percival, Alexander's charming cousin, whispered something to a man near the music gallery. Alexander's gaze moved, briefly and sharply, toward the side corridor where Martha stood hidden. The first notes began. They were polished, elegant, and wrong. Martha lowered her eyes. Pressing her rough hands together until the burn on her skin stung, she knew the old song. Alexander knew she knew it. And now, before the crown itself, Sterling House was about to sing a lie. Chapter 2. Cast out before the crown. The first mistake came before the third measure, so small that most of the guests only heard a graceful turn of melody, but Martha heard a blade slide out of its sheath. Standing in the side corridor with her back pressed to the shadowed wall, she felt the wrong note travel through the ballroom like a crack beneath polished ice. The violinists played with confidence. The hired lifted their chins. Lady Evelina stood beside Duke Alexander, Sterling with a satisfied smile, her pale blue silk whispering each time she shifted her weight. While Lord Percival Sterling watched the music gallery too closely for a man who claimed to care nothing for songs. The crown's envoy, however, did not smile. His face remained still. His eyes fixed on the singers as the old anthem moved toward the Latin passage. Martha's rough fingers curled into her apron. She could smell coal on herself, even from here, beneath the roses and perfume drifting out of the ballroom. She told herself to stay silent. A kitchen maid did not correct musicians before nobles. A fat servant in a stained apron did not save a duke from embarrassment. She had been ordered not to sing. She had been ordered to stand in the shadow. So she stood there, heart hammering, while the grandest room in Sterling House prepared to shame itself before the crown. The singers reached the ancient line and broke it. The tenor clipped the vowel. The soprano softened the command. Worst of all, the final descent vanished completely, replaced by a fashionable flourish that belonged in an opera. Not in a royal oath. The crown's envoy raised one gloved hand. The music stopped so abruptly that the last violin note died in a thin, trembling scrape. The ballroom fell silent. For a moment no one moved except the candle flames. Then the envoy spoke, his voice low enough to force everyone to listen. "Who prepared this version?" Lady Evelina's smile tightened. But she recovered quickly. "Surely there is some misunderstanding, sir. The anthem was copied from the Sterling music sheets." The envoy did not look at her. He looked at Alexander. Your Grace, the version just performed omits a line that has legal and ceremonial meaning. It also alters the Latin. A murmur passed through the guests, silk rustling, fans pausing. Jewels trembling at throats. Alexander's expression remained cold, but Martha saw his jaw. Harden he knew. He had known there was danger in the song, and now the danger had stepped into the candlelight. Lord Percival moved forward with practiced ease, handsome, perfumed, and smiling, as though no accusation could ever cling to a man of his birth. My dear sir, old music is always full of variations. Surely we need not turn a pleasant evening into an examination of dusty chapel habits. The envoy's eyes shifted to him. When a household performs before the crown, Lord Percival. Dusty habits may become evidence. The word evidence changed the air. Lady Evelina's fan snapped open. Countess Rowena Ashbury, standing near the white roses, lowered her gaze too quickly. Alexander noticed. Martha noticed him noticing. She did not understand all of it, but she understood fear when it moved behind silk. The music master stammered from the gallery. Your Grace, I copied the piece exactly as it was delivered to me. Alexander's voice cut across the room. Delivered by whom? The music master. Swallowed by Mr. Havers, my Lord Percival's secretary. Percival gave a light laugh. A secretary handles paper. He does not compose treason. The envoy turned fully now. No one has spoken of treason. The silence after that sentence was colder than winter glass. Martha's stomach tightened. She saw Percival's smile flicker. She saw Evelina glance toward the side corridor. Then Evelina's eyes found her. There is one person who was heard singing in the passage earlier. Evelina said smoothly. The room followed her gaze. Martha stepped back, but there was nowhere to go. The open ballroom doors framed her like a servant placed in a dock. 100 faces turned. Powdered ladies, stiff-backed gentlemen, footmen with trays, Clara near the wine table wearing a little smile of triumph. Evelina continued, her voice delicate and poisonous, a kitchen maid. Martha Bell, she was humming some vulgar chapel version near His Grace before the ball. Perhaps she confused the musicians. Servants do love meddling in things above their station. Martha's face burned. She wanted to disappear into the wall, into the smoke still clinging to her apron, into any darkness where those eyes could not strip her piece by piece. Mrs. Vale, standing behind the servants, went pale with rage and fear. The crown's envoy said, "Bring her here." No one moved at first. Then Alexander gave the smallest nod. A footman approached Martha and gestured her forward. She walked into the ballroom with slow, heavy steps, feeling each one echo against the polished floor. Her shoes had been scrubbed, but not enough. A faint trace of coal dust marked the boards behind her. She heard a lady whisper, "Good heavens!" Another murmured, "In that apron?" Clara's voice, low but sharp, reached her from the side. "Do not trip." Martha kept her eyes lowered. The chandeliers were too bright. The roses too white. The silk gowns seemed to recoil as she passed, opening a path not out of respect but disgust. She stopped before Alexander, Evelina, and the crown's envoy. Then curtsied as deeply as her shaking knees allowed. "Sir, your grace, my lady." The envoy studied her. Unlike the nobles, he did not look amused. "Your name is Martha Bell?" "Yes." "Sir. You were heard singing the old anthem?" Martha hesitated. She felt Alexander's gaze on her, colder and sharper than anyone else. She remembered his order. "Do not sing in the passages again." "I hummed a line by mistake, sir." Evelina laughed softly. "By mistake? How modest. One almost admires the performance." The envoy ignored her. "Where did you learn it?" Martha's throat tightened. Every answer threatened someone. Herself, her dead mother, perhaps even the Duke. "From my mother, sir." "Her name?" Martha's fingers pressed together until the burn on her hand pulsed. Agnes Bell, Countess Rowena's fan, stopped moving. Percival's eyes narrowed. Alexander saw both reactions. The envoy's face changed, not dramatically, but enough. "Agnes Bell of St. Bartholomew's Chapel." Martha lifted her eyes despite herself. "Yes, sir." The whisper that moved through the room was different now. Less mocking, more uncertain. Evelina stepped forward before the envoy could ask more. "Sir, surely we are not placing royal ceremony in the hands of a scullery girl because she claims her mother taught her a tune. Look at her. She has coal beneath her nails." Martha's cheeks flamed. But she did not hide her hands. Evelina's voice sharpened as she sensed the room wavering. "This is exactly how disorder begins. A servant is given one moment of attention. And suddenly she imagines her greasy little memory superior to trained musicians and noble judgment." The words struck Martha in front of everyone. She could hear silk shifting. Hear restrained laughter rising again. Hear Clara breathe out with pleasure. Martha looked down. Her body felt huge beneath their eyes. Every curve and stain turned into evidence against her. Yet beneath the shame something else stirred. The old song, steady as a pulse, the envoy asked. Can you sing the missing line correctly? Martha's breath caught. Evelina said at once. Absolutely not. Percival added it would be an insult to the crown. Countess Rowena spoke for the first time, her voice calm but tight. The girl may know a peasant variant. Such things often carry seditious additions. Best not to give them air. That phrase made Martha's head lift. Give them air. Her mother's words, twisted now by a woman afraid of the same truth. Alexander's eyes fixed on Rowena, then returned to Martha. For several seconds he said nothing. The whole ballroom waited. Martha could feel his decision forming like ice over deep water. At last, Alexander spoke. No, the single word cut through the room. Martha looked at him. He did not look away. His face was unreadable, his posture absolute. This is my house, he continued. And I will not have a coal-stained kitchen maid become the entertainment of the crown. The sentence landed harder than Evelina's insults because it came from him. Martha had expected no kindness, but still something inside her recoiled. Evelina's smile bloomed. Clara looked delighted. A few guests laughed quietly now that the Duke himself had made contempt safe again. The envoy frowned. Your Grace, if the woman knows the line, Alexander interrupted, colder still. Then she may know many things she does not understand. Remove her from the ballroom. Martha did not move. For one dangerous heartbeat, her eyes remained on his. She wanted to ask why he had questioned her in the passage, if he meant to shame her. Here she wanted to ask whether truth became dirty, because it passed through a servant's mouth. But her life had taught her that poor women paid dearly for public questions, so she curtsied. Yes, Your Grace. As she turned, Evelina's voice followed her, clear enough for the nearest guests to hear. Do scrub before you dream of music again, Martha. Smoke has a way of making common girls believe they are surrounded by mystery. This time the laughter was sharper. Martha walked through it. Her steps were slow, not because she wished to be dramatic, but because if she moved too quickly, she feared she might stumble. The coal marks behind her seemed darker now. She reached the ballroom doors, with her throat aching and her eyes dry by force. No tears, not here, not for them. Behind her, the envoy's voice hardened. Then who in this house will provide the correct anthem? No one answered. The musicians stared down at their sheets. Percival looked away. Rowena lifted her fan again, but her hand trembled. Evelina said lightly, perhaps the old line is unnecessary. The envoy replied, nothing required by the crown is unnecessary. That silenced her. Martha stopped just beyond the threshold. She had been removed, but the doors remained open. The corridor held her in shadow again, yet every word from the ballroom reached her. Alexander said, Music Master, begin again. The musicians obeyed. The anthem started from the top. Once more it was beautiful. Once more it was wrong. The singers approached the missing line, hesitated and faltered. A soprano lost pitch. The tenor came in too soon. The Latin broke apart entirely. The envoy stood. This time his anger was unmistakable. Enough the bow slipped from one violinist's hand and struck the gallery floor. Silence fell so completely that Martha could hear the faint crackle of coal smoke somewhere far below stairs. As if the kitchen itself were breathing beneath the polished house. Then the envoy said, Duke Sterling, either your household has forgotten its oath or someone has altered it. Alexander did not answer immediately. In the great mirror opposite the ballroom doors, Martha saw his reflection. He was looking not at the envoy, not at Evelina, not at the musicians. He was looking at the open doorway, where she stood half hidden. Martha understood then that his cruelty had not been simple. He had cast her out, yes. He had humiliated her, yes. But he was also watching, who relaxed when she was removed, who feared her voice, who wanted the old song buried. The knowledge did not ease the hurt. A knife used for strategy still cut flesh. The envoy lifted the altered music sheet from the stand and held it up. This version removes the ancient witness line. That omission is not innocent. Percival's face paled. Rowena whispered something to the man beside her. Evelina's smile thinned into anger. The room began to turn restless, frightened now rather than amused. Martha stood in the corridor with her rough hands clenched and her mother's song pressing against her ribs like a living thing. Then a young page, white-faced and shaking, stumbled from the music gallery stairs carrying a torn scrap of paper. Your Grace, he whispered. Though the whole room heard him, this was hidden beneath the music master's book. Alexander took it. His eyes moved over the page and his expression sharpened. The crown's envoy stepped closer. What is it? Alexander folded the scrap, in his hand a sequence of numbers. The envoy's gaze darkened. A cipher, no one spoke. Martha knew without being told, the missing notes, the old line, the song her mother had guarded. It was not merely ceremonial. It was a key. Evelina suddenly turned toward the doorway. "Why is that maid still there? Did his grace not order her removed?" Martha stepped back as if struck, but Alexander raised one hand. The room froze. Slowly he turned, his eyes met Martha's across the distance of candles, silk, rank, and humiliation. "Wait," he said, one word. Not apology, not protection, a command. But it stopped the footmen before they could touch her. Martha stood at the threshold, cast out yet not released, mocked yet suddenly necessary, her coal-stained apron dark against the gold light of the ballroom. The crown's envoy looked from Alexander to her and said, "Your Grace, if that woman knows the old song, then she may be the only honest voice in this room." The laughter died completely. And Martha, who had spent her life being told to lower her eyes, slowly lifted them. Chapter 3. The song that turned the ballroom silent for several seconds after the crown's envoy spoke. No one in the ballroom seemed willing to breathe. Martha stood at the threshold with one foot in shadow and one foot touched by the gold light of the chandeliers, her coal-stained apron hanging heavy over her body. Her burned hand half hidden in the folds of her skirt, her heart beating so violently she could feel it in her throat. Only moments before, she had been ordered away as an embarrassment. Now every face that had laughed at her turned back with a different expression. Not respect, not kindness, but fear dressed as attention. Lady Evelina's lips parted in disbelief. Lord Percival's hand tightened around the stem of his glass until the wine trembled. Countess Rowena stood very still beneath the white roses. Her fan open but unmoving. Duke Alexander Sterling remained near the music stand. The torn scrap of numbers folded in his hand, his grey eyes fixed on Martha as though the entire house had narrowed to the space between her mouth and the truth he suspected she carried. The crown's envoy repeated, colder this time. "Your Grace, if that woman knows the old song, she must sing it." Alexander did not answer at once. His face showed nothing, but Martha saw the faint movement in his jaw. The calculation, the suspicion, and something darker beneath it that might have been regret. Evelina stepped forward quickly, her silk whispering like a blade drawn through water. "Sir, this is absurd. A royal anthem cannot be handed to a kitchen servant because she hummed in a corridor. You insult the crown by suggesting it should receive music through such a mouth." The envoy turned his head toward her. "Lady Blackthorne, I have heard trained singers corrupt an oath tonight. I am now more interested in correctness than ornament." A few guests lowered their eyes. Evelina flushed but recovered with the pride of a woman unused to public refusal. "Correctness from her? Look at her hands. She has coal under the nails. She smells of the range. If she knows any old song, it is more likely from rebels and beggars than from loyal households." Martha's fingers curled tighter, but she did not speak. She had been insulted too often to bleed outwardly from every cut. Alexander's voice entered the silence. "Martha Bell," she looked at him. He did not soften the command with apology. "Step forward." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of rank, of dismissal recalled, of a man who had wounded her before deciding he needed her. Martha walked back into the ballroom. Each step seemed louder than the last. The floor reflected the dark hem of her dress and the pale blur of the ladies drawing away. The smell of roses and perfume surrounded her, but she could still smell coal in her own sleeves. And that coal felt like an accusation the room kept reading aloud. She stopped before the envoy and curtsied. "Sir," the envoy studied her with severity rather than contempt. "You will sing the old Sterling Anthem as you learned it from your mother." Slowly, clearly. "If there are words missing from the printed version, you will include them." Martha's throat tightened. "Sir, I have not sung before a room like this." Evelina laughed under her breath. "At least she knows the difference between a chapel ruin and society." The envoy ignored her. "Can you sing the line?" Martha looked once toward Alexander. The Duke's face remained cold, but his eyes held a command quieter than speech. Tell the truth. It angered her that he could ask truth from her after using shame as a tool. It angered her more that truth still mattered. Martha drew a breath. Her first note was almost too low to hear. Some guests shifted, expecting failure. Clara, near the servants' wall, smiled with cruel anticipation, but then Martha's voice opened. It did not glitter like the hired soprano. It did not decorate the room or flatter the ear. It rose deep, steady, and pure, carrying not the polish of a music room but the ache of winter chapels. Kitchen smoke, hunger, endurance, and prayers, whispered by women who were never invited to speak before power. The ballroom changed before the second phrase ended. Fans stopped moving. A footman froze with a tray still lifted in both hands. The music master lowered his eyes as if ashamed of the paper before him. Martha sang the Latin cleanly, each word shaped with a care that made the language feel alive again. When she reached the missing line, her voice descended exactly where the false sheet had replaced it with fashionable softness. Aurum non coronum servat. The gold in the room seemed suddenly vulgar. Jewels at noble throats flashed beneath candlelight like exposed evidence. The crown's envoy went pale. Again he said. Martha stopped, her breath trembled, but she nodded. Yes. Sir, she sang the line again, slower. This time Alexander unfolded the scrap of numbers and looked from the page to the rhythm of her melody. The envoy moved closer, counting beneath his breath. 7, 2, 9. Alexander's eyes sharpened. The notes correspond. Percival gave a laugh too quickly. Correspond to what, cousin? Are we now arresting men because a maid sings numbers into your imagination? Alexander did not look at him. You are afraid too early, Percival. That silenced him. The envoy took the scrap from Alexander and compared it to the altered sheet. The omitted line carries a sequence. The printed version destroys it. Countess Rowena closed her fan at last. The snap was small, but everyone heard it. Martha saw her face then, beautiful and powdered with panic living just beneath the skin. The envoy addressed Martha again. Do you know the rest? Martha hesitated. The truth was dangerous. The old anthem her mother taught her did not merely contain one hidden dissent. It contained pauses, repeated syllables, and strange note lengths that Agnes Bell had made her practice by candlelight, until Martha could sing them in her sleep. As a child, she had thought them holy peculiarities. As a woman standing before the crown's envoy and a room full of frightened nobles, she understood they had been a lock. I know what my mother taught me, she said carefully. Then sing from the beginning. Evelina stepped forward again, anger now overpowering elegance. No, this farce has gone far enough, Alexander. Surely you will not let this servant continue humiliating your guests. Alexander turned to her. My guests appear to have survived worse humiliations than truth. Evelina stared at him as though he had slapped her. A murmur moved through the room, but no one laughed now. Martha began again. This time there was no accompaniment. The absence of instruments made her voice more powerful, not less. It filled the ballroom without effort, touching the painted ceiling. The mirrors, the stiff shoulders of gentlemen, the white throats of ladies who had mocked her body only minutes before, her stained apron, her heavy figure, her rough hands, all the things they had used to reduce her remained visible. Yet the song made those judgments seem small. When she reached each hidden turn, the envoy counted. Alexander wrote quickly on the back of a calling card. 14, the envoy murmured. Third line 6. Ninth measure. Alexander's writing stopped. Ledger references. The room tightened. Percival's smile had vanished completely. That is nonsense. Alexander looked up at him. Then you will not object when I ask my solicitor to bring the estate ledgers. Percival's face changed just enough to condemn him at the mention of ledgers. Martha faltered. The note thinned. And for the first time her composure cracked. Her mother's face rose before her, pale, tired, lit by chapel candles, whispering, if anyone ever asks why the song matters, remember that music can hide what paper cannot survive. Martha had never understood. She had only known that after Agnes Bell died disgraced, men came searching their room and found nothing. They had turned mattresses, cracked floorboards, shaken hymn books, and still they missed the truth because it lived in a child's memory. In Martha's memory, she had carried it for years while carrying coal, never knowing which burden was heavier. The envoy noticed her falter. Continue, Miss Bell. The use of Miss struck the room almost as sharply as accusation. Martha lifted her eyes. Sir, my mother was called a traitor for that song. The envoy expression hardened, but not against her. Agnes Bell was accused. She was never properly heard. Countess Rowena said sharply, many accused traitors have daughters who wish to polish old shame into martyrdom. Alexander's gaze cut to her. You knew her name quickly, Countess. Rowena smiled too late. Society remembers scandals. Society, Alexander said, often remembers the lie it was paid to repeat. A deeper silence followed. Evelina, sensing the danger shifting away from Martha and toward her own circle, changed tactics. She stepped close enough that Martha could smell her violet perfume. You poor thing, she said, her voice soft now, almost tender, and therefore more cruel. They are using you. Can you not see that? You will sing, they will take what they need. And tomorrow you will still be below stairs with grease on your sleeves and no one to defend you. Do not embarrass yourself further. A woman should know the limits of her place. Martha looked at her. In the candlelight, Evelina was everything society praised. Slender, pale, jeweled, graceful, untouched by work. Martha felt the full weight of her own body. The ache in her feet, the heat rash beneath her collar, the roughness of her hands. But for once, shame did not silence her. "My place, my lady, has always been where work was needed." Her voice was quiet, but it carried, "Tonight it appears work is needed." Here a few servants looked up. Clara's smile died. Alexander's mouth tightened in what might have been approval. Though Martha did not want his approval enough to look for it. The envoy raised the altered music sheet. "Sing the final section." Martha did. The last passage was lower, older. Almost mournful as she sang, the envoy and Alexander marked the sequence. Numbers became columns. Columns became accounts. Accounts became names. Alexander's solicitor, summoned from a nearby study, entered with a leather ledger under one arm. The Duke opened it on the music stand, ignoring the scandalized gasps at placing estate accounts where music had been. "Page 7. He said, "Line 2. Ninth entry." The solicitor found it and went still. Alexander read aloud, "Transfer authorized to Ashbury Relief Fund. Countess Rowena's face drained of color." DeMarva sang the next phrase. Alexander followed the pattern. "Page 4. Line 6. 14th entry." The solicitor whispered, "Payment to Havers." Percival swore under his breath. The envoy heard. Everyone heard. Panic moved through the ballroom now. Not loudly, but visibly. Fans fluttered without rhythm. Men shifted away from Percival. Lady Evelina's composure began to fracture. Her smile stretched too tightly over fury. "This proves nothing," she said. "Numbers can be forced to mean anything." Alexander closed the ledger with one hand indeed, which is why the person who altered the anthem feared the original being sung. He looked toward the music gallery. "Bring Mr. Havers." A servant hurried out. Percival stepped after him, but the envoy's guards moved to the doors. The ballroom was no longer a ballroom. It had become a trap with chandeliers. Martha stood in the center of it, dizzy with the speed of what had happened. She had not saved herself. Not yet. She had not cleared her mother. Not yet, but the laughter had died. That alone felt impossible. No one was calling her a cupboard now. No one was comparing her to livestock. They looked at her as if her stained apron might conceal a document. As if her cracked hands might open locked rooms. As if the fat maid they had cast out carried a weapon none of them knew how to hold. Alexander stepped closer for the first time that evening. He spoke to her without the hard edge meant for an audience. "Did your mother leave anything besides the song?" Martha's instinct was to say no, to protect the last hidden corner of Agnes Bell from men in polished boots and women with poisonous smiles. But she heard the tremor in Percival's breathing, saw Rowena's fear, saw the envoy waiting not with mockery but with grim attention. "She left a hymn book," Martha said. "Where?" Alexander asked. Martha looked at him, remembering the corridor, the humiliation, the order that had sent her away like dirt from his floor. "Not here." His eyes narrowed. "Can you retrieve it?" "Yes." Evelina cut in. "You would let her leave with evidence?" "She will run." Martha turned toward her slowly. "My lady, women like me do not run far. The world has made sure of that." The answer struck harder than anger would have. Before Alexander could speak, the servant sent for Havers returned alone, breathless and pale. "Your Grace." "Mr. Havers is gone. His room is emptied. The stable boy says a rider left by the north gate 10 minutes ago." Percival's face betrayed him before his mouth could lie. The envoy turned to Alexander. "Seal the gates." Alexander gave the order at once. Footmen ran. Guards moved. The great house that had glittered for pleasure now tightened into alarm. Then the candles near the music gallery suddenly flickered. A maid screamed from behind the gallery curtain. Smoke began to curl, thin and gray at first, then darker. Someone shouted. "Fire!" The ballroom broke into movement. Ladies cried out. Men rushed backward. The musicians scrambled from their chairs. Alexander looked up and saw flames catching at the edge of the altered music sheets. Someone had set the gallery papers alight to destroy what remained. Martha moved before anyone ordered her. She seized the heavy water pitcher from a supper table and pushed through the guests with a strength that startled those who tried to block her. "Move," she said, not loudly, but with such force that even a baron stepped aside. She reached the gallery stairs, lifted her skirts and climbed. Smoke thickened. Heat licked the railing. Behind her, Alexander shouted her name, but Martha did not stop at the top. She found the burning stack of music and stamped hard on the fallen sheets, then threw water over the flames. Steam burst upward, carrying the sharp smell of scorched paper. Her apron caught a black smear of ash. and her lungs burned, but beneath the half-burned pile she saw one folded sheet untouched by flame. Marked in the same hand as the altered anthem, she grabbed it when she descended. Coughing, the ballroom was silent again. Alexander met her at the foot of the stairs, his face no longer merely cold but furious. "You could have been burned." Martha held out the folded sheet with her blackened hand. "So could the truth, Your Grace." He stared at her hand, then at her face. For the first time, something like shame crossed his eyes openly enough for her to see. The envoy took the rescued sheet and unfolded it. His expression darkened. "This is not music," he said. "It is a list of names." Percival backed away. Rowena closed her eyes. Evelina whispered, "Impossible." Alexander looked around the room, his voice dropping to a softness more terrifying than any shout. "No one leaves Sterling House tonight." Then his gaze returned to Martha Bell, standing in a burned, coal-stained apron beneath the chandeliers. "And no one," he said, each word cutting cleanly through the room, "will insult this woman again until I have learned exactly why so many of you feared her song." Martha should have felt protected. Instead, she felt the danger deepen, because every enemy in the ballroom now knew what Alexander had only begun to understand. The fat maid was not merely a witness, she was the key. Chapter 4. The Locked House. The order struck Sterling House like a pistol fired beneath glass. "No one leaves." For one breath, the ballroom stayed frozen around Duke Alexander Sterling's words. Every candle flame trembling over faces that had been laughing at Martha Bell less than an hour before. Then fear broke through the room in small, ugly sounds. A lady's sharp gasp. A gentleman's muttered curse. The scrape of a chair pushed back too quickly. The rustle of silk as Lady Evelina Blackthorne turned on Alexander with her diamonds flashing at her throat. "You cannot mean to imprison your own guests," she said, her voice high enough to reveal panic beneath its polish. Alexander did not look at her. His eyes were on the folded sheet the Crown's envoy had taken from Martha's blackened hand. The sheet rescued from the fire in the music gallery. "I mean," he said, "that someone altered a ceremonial anthem, attempted to destroy evidence, and sent Mr. Havers fleeing through my north gate. Until I know who ordered it, this house is sealed." The envoy, stern and unmoving in black and gold, gave a curt nod to his guards. At once men moved to the doors, footmen were ordered to the side passages. The grand ballroom with its roses, mirrors, champagne, and glittering silk became a gilded cage. Martha stood near the music gallery stairs, coughing quietly from the smoke she had inhaled. Her stained apron darker now with ash, her broad chest rising and falling as she tried to breathe without drawing attention. She still felt the heat of the small fire against her face. Still felt the folded paper against her fingers though the envoy had taken it. Still felt the shock of Alexander's last words. "No one will insult this woman again." They should have comforted her. Perhaps, but protection spoken after humiliation had a strange taste. It sat in her heart like warm water poured into a cracked cup. Useful, but not enough to mend it. The Crown's envoy unfolded the rescued sheet on the music stand, while Alexander's solicitor brought the estate ledger closer. The whole room watched, but no one dared come too near. The envoy read in silence first, his face growing harder with each line. Alexander leaned over the page, and Martha saw his expression change from suspicion to certainty. "Names," the envoy said at last. "Not complete charges, but names placed beside sums and dates. Ashbury Relief Fund, Havers. A courier mark, initials." Alexander's gaze moved across the room and stopped on Countess Rowena Ashbury. The Countess did not faint, did not tremble, did not plead. She simply smiled with a widow's practiced calm and said, "A relief fund bears my name, because I fund relief, Your Grace." "Charity is not yet treason," no, Alexander answered. "But charity used as a purse for forged correspondence may become so." Lord Percival stepped forward, pale but still attempting arrogance. "This is madness. A half-burned paper, a servant's song, and suddenly you speak as if we are criminals. Alexander, you have always loved suspicion, but tonight you risk making yourself ridiculous." Alexander finally looked at him. "Then you will enjoy proving me wrong." Percival's mouth tightened gladly. "Good, you will begin by explaining why your secretary ran the moment." Martha Bell recovered this list. Percival's answer came too late. "A guilty servant runs from noise. Havers is a coward, not a conspirator," the envoy said. "Cowards often carry other men's guilt." The line silenced the room again. Martha tried to step backward into the wall, but Alexander saw the movement. "Miss Bell." The title made the servants near the door look up. Clara, who had stood among them with her tray forgotten, went rigid with resentment. Mrs. Vale's face darkened as though Martha had stolen something from her personally. Martha turned toward Alexander. Your Grace, you said your mother left a hymn book. Yes, Your Grace, where is it? The question drew every dangerous eye in the ballroom toward her. Percival watched too sharply. Rowena's fan resumed moving, slow and controlled. Evelina looked from Alexander to Martha with open hatred now, no longer bothering to disguise it as amusement. Martha understood that the hymn book had become more valuable than any jewel in the room. She also understood that once she told them where it was, they would never stop hunting it. It is hidden, she said. Alexander's eyes narrowed. In this house? No, Your Grace, at the chapel? Martha's breath caught before she could stop it. The answer was visible in her face. Evelina saw it, Rowena saw it, Percival saw it, Alexander saw all of them seeing it and cursed softly under his breath. Seal the stables, he ordered. No carriage, no horse, no servant sent outside without my mark. He turned back to Martha. You will come with me. Evelina laughed once, sharp and incredulous. You cannot be serious. You would leave your guests to escort a kitchen maid through the countryside? I am not escorting her, Alexander said. I am protecting evidence. Evelina's mouth twisted. How noble evidence now has coal on its face. Alexander stepped toward her and his voice dropped to that terrifying softness the room had begun to fear. Take care, Lady Blackthorn. You are very close to forgetting my warning. Evelina went white with fury, but she fell silent. Before Alexander could move, Mrs. Ville pushed forward from the servants' line and curtsied stiffly. Your Grace, forgive me, but Martha is under my charge. If she has concealed anything connected to this scandal, I must insist she be searched and confined below until proper authorities decide you must insist. Alexander repeated. Mrs. Vale swallowed. For the order of the household, Your Grace. The order of this household allowed a forged anthem to reach the crown and a fire to be set in my gallery. His gaze cut over the servants, then returned to her. Your order is no longer persuasive. Mrs. Velos' face burned. Clara, sensing her mistress' anger and eager to feed it, stepped out. Your Grace, Martha has always been secretive, she hums to herself. Hides scraps, goes near old corridors. We all thought it was simple dullness, but perhaps, Alexander interrupted. The rest of you mistook silence for guilt because it pleased you to do so. Clara recoiled as if struck. Martha looked down, not because she wished to protect Clara, but because kindness from Alexander in public felt almost as painful as his cruelty had. It forced the room to look at what it had done, and rooms like this never forgave the person who made them ashamed. The envoy folded the rescued sheet and placed it inside his coat. Your Grace, the hymn book must be retrieved immediately. If it contains the full cipher, it may confirm whether these entries are charity records. Treason payments or something worse? Alexander nodded. We leave now. Martha lifted her head. Your Grace, the chapel road will be watched. If Mr. Havers escaped north, then we do not take the chapel road. She blinked. There is another path, you know it? Yes. A faint murmur spread through the room. Evelina's eyes narrowed. Of course she knows hidden paths. How convenient. How very like a servant who has practiced sneaking. Martha turned to her at last. She did not raise her voice. Poor people know back paths, my lady, because front doors are often closed. The words struck cleanly. A few servants lowered their eyes to hide sudden emotion. Alexander's face remained stern, but something in his gaze sharpened toward respect. You will show me, he said. Martha nodded. But not in that gown, Your Grace. The low field is mud after rain. Your boots will sink, and the hedges will tear fine cloth. A stunned silence followed. No servant corrected a duke's clothing before half the county. Percival gave a bitter little laugh. There, cousin, your new advisor has spoken. Alexander ignored him. What do you require? Martha hesitated, then answered practically. A plain coat, no lantern, until we clear the west wall. 2 men only, and neither from the household staff. The envoy nodded. My guards. Martha shook her head. 1 guard. Too many footsteps. Draw attention. Alexander studied her. You have done this before. I have walked home hungry in weather no carriage would enter, Your Grace. That teaches a person where ground holds and where it betrays. Within minutes, the glittering ball dissolved into controlled chaos. Guests were moved from the ballroom into the adjoining supper room under guard. Servants were questioned in corners. The music master wept over his ruined sheets. Mrs. Vale hissed orders no one obeyed with the same fear as before. Alexander returned wearing a dark riding coat instead of formal black, his hair no longer arranged with ballroom precision, his expression colder for being stripped of ceremony. Martha had been given an old cloak from the servants' pegs, too short across her shoulders and smelling of damp wool, but she pulled it tight without complaint as they approached the side passage. Evelina stepped into their path. She had regained enough composure to be beautiful again, but not enough to be wise. "Alexander," she said softly, using his name as if it were a claim. "Let others fetch the book. You are angry and making a spectacle. Think what people will say when they learn you ran into the night with a maid." Alexander looked at her hand where it rested lightly against his sleeve. Slowly, deliberately, he removed it. "Tonight I have learned that people say many things when truth frightens them." Evelina's eyes glistened, but with rage, not tears. "And when this creature disappoints you, when you discover she is only an overfed servant with a pretty trick of memory." Martha stood beside them and said nothing. Alexander answered without looking away from Evelina. "Then she will still have shown more courage in 1 hour than many born to silk have shown in a lifetime." Evelina's face hardened into something ugly enough that even her diamonds could not soften it. "You will regret humiliating me for her," Alexander's voice lowered. "No, Lady Blackthorn, I regret humiliating her for you." That sentence followed Martha into the servants' passage more fiercely than any declaration could have. She did not know what to do with it. Part of her wanted to believe it. Another part, older and better trained by pain, warned that noble remorse could fade by morning, while servants carried consequences for years. They left through a narrow west door. Alexander, Martha, and one of the envoy's guards, a silent man named Mr. Reed. The night hit them with wet cold. Rain had thinned to mist. But the courtyard stones shone black beneath the moon. From the sealed ballroom behind them came muffled voices. No longer laughter, but alarm. Martha led them along the wall, away from the stables, past the laundry yard, and through a gap in the yew hedge servants used when errands required speed and secrecy. Alexander followed without complaint, though mud soon marked his boots. Reed stayed behind them, hand near his pistol. For several minutes no one spoke. Only the wet grass brushed against Martha's skirts. The wind moved through bare branches, and the distant house glowed behind them like a beautiful lie. At the first field, Alexander caught up beside her. "You should have told me you knew the anthem when I asked." Martha kept walking. "You had already decided I was a thing to test." "Your Grace, I had decided everyone in my house was capable of lying. That is not the same as deciding everyone deserves to be shamed." He was silent long enough that she thought the conversation ended. Then he said, "No, it is not." The admission came quietly, almost roughly, and because it was not dressed in charm, Martha believed at least that he meant it in the moment. "My mother used to say," she replied, "that powerful men often call suspicion wisdom because it sounds cleaner than fear." Alexander looked at her. "Your mother seems to have said many dangerous things." "Yes." Martha's voice softened. "That may be why she died poor." They reached the low field where rainwater gathered. Martha lifted her skirts with one hand and tested the ground before stepping. "Keep to the left, Your Grace. The center will swallow your boots." Alexander obeyed. It might have been the first time that evening he followed her command without turning it into one of his own. They were halfway across when Reed made a sharp sound behind them. Alexander turned at once. Near the hedge line, a shadow moved, then another. Martha froze. Reed drew his pistol. "Who goes there?" No answer came. The wind bent the grass. A horse snorted somewhere beyond the trees. Alexander moved instinctively in front of Martha, but she caught his sleeve. "No," she whispered, "that is what they want." He looked down at her hand on his arm, broad, rough, stained by ash and coal. She released him quickly, embarrassed, but continued. "The chapel path is narrow ahead. If they drive us forward, we will be trapped between the wall and the ditch." Alexander's eyes hardened. "How many?" I heard 2 steps, perhaps 3. Reed aimed into the dark. A shot cracked from the hedge. The sound tore through the night. Martha flinched but did not scream. Mud jumped near Alexander's boot. Reed fired back. One shadow cursed and dropped low. Alexander seized Martha's arm. Not cruelly, but firmly. "Run this time." She did not argue. She ran as well as her heavy body allowed, breath burning, skirts dragging through mud, cloak slapping against her legs. Behind them, Reed fired again. Alexander stayed close, matching her pace rather than leaving her behind. And when her foot slipped near the ditch, he caught her by the waist and hauled her upright with surprising strength. For 1 second she was pressed against him, ashamed of her weight, expecting disgust. None came. He only said, "Can you stand?" She nodded. "Then move." They reached the broken outer wall of St. Bartholomew's Chapel with Reed still behind them. Breathing hard but unhurt, the chapel rose from the dark like a ruined memory, its roof half collapsed, its stones silvered by moonlight. Ivy crawling over the arch where Martha had once stood as a child listening to her mother sing. The place smelled of rain, moss, old wood, and grief. Martha pushed through the crooked door. Inside, moonlight fell through holes in the roof and pooled on the cracked floor. Alexander slowed, sensing at once that this was not merely a hiding place to her. It was a grave without a stone. "Where?" he asked softly. Martha crossed to the broken altar. Her hands trembled now. Not from fear of gunfire, but from memory. She knelt, her knees pressing into damp dust, and felt beneath the third loose tile behind the altar step. For a terrible moment she found nothing. Her breath stopped. Then her fingers touched oilcloth. She pulled it free, dark with age but dry within. Inside lay a small hymn book, worn almost to pieces, its leather cover cracked, its pages swollen at the edges. Martha held it to her chest before she could stop herself. "Mother," she whispered. Alexander did not interrupt. Reed stood guard at the door outside. No footsteps approached yet, but the danger had not passed. Martha opened the hymn book carefully. Agnes Bel's handwriting filled the margins, musical notes, Latin words, numbers, names, and one sentence written in English beneath the final anthem. Martha read it aloud, her voice breaking despite all her effort to keep it steady. "If my daughter lives to sing this, then let the crown know I did not betray it. I hid the proof because Lord Percival Sterling and Countess Rowena Ashbury paid men to forge the Duke's accounts and planned to place blame upon the house itself." Alexander went utterly still. The name Sterling in that confession seemed to strike him personally, though the guilt was not his own. Martha turned the page. There was more: a list of payments, a chapel register, a reference to a witness hidden among the servants. Then, tucked between two pages, a lock of dark hair and a small folded letter fell into Martha's lap. She opened the letter with shaking fingers. It was addressed not to Agnes Bell, but to Alexander's father, the late Duke. The signature at the bottom belonged to Rowena Ashbury. Before Martha could read further, Reed spoke sharply from the chapel door. "Your Grace Riders." Alexander took one step toward Martha, the book. She clutched it tighter. "No." His eyes flashed. "Martha, if they catch you with it, then they catch me with my mother's name in my hands, not buried under their lies." For a moment they stared at one another, the ruined chapel between them, the night closing in, the past finally breathing through paper and song. Then Alexander removed his riding coat and wrapped it around the hymn book while it was still in Martha's arms. "Then we protect both," he said. The first rider appeared beneath the broken arch. Pistol raised, hand over the book. His face was half covered, but Martha knew the voice from the household. One of Percival's hired men, often seen near the stables. Reed fired, and the man dropped behind the wall. Another shot shattered the chapel window, sending old-colored glass raining across the floor. Martha ducked. Alexander pulled her behind the altar, his body shielding hers as glass scattered like frozen tears around them. In the chaos, the folded letter slipped from Martha's hand and skidded across the stone. A boot stepped through the doorway toward it. Martha lunged before thought could stop her. She seized the letter just as the man reached down, and Alexander struck him hard across the face with the butt of Reed's second pistol. The man fell. Reed dragged the door beam into place. "We cannot hold long." Alexander turned to Martha. "Is there another way out?" She nodded toward the collapsed vestry, a narrow passage. "It leads to the burial yard." "Go you first, Your Grace." Martha. His voice was command again. She met his eyes. "The evidence is in my arms. If I fall behind, you will need to know where I fell." For a heartbeat, even under attack, Alexander looked as though she had wounded him. Then he nodded once. Together they forced their way through the vestry passage, shoulders scraping damp stone. Martha's breath came hard. The hymn book was pressed beneath Alexander's coat against her chest, the letter tucked into her bodice, the old song beating in her mind like a second heart. Behind them, men hammered at the chapel door. Reed followed last, cursing under his breath. They emerged into the burial yard under a black sky. Sterling House glowed far away beyond the fields, sealed and waiting, full of nobles who believed themselves powerful because the truth had not yet returned. Alexander took Martha's arm again, but this time he did not drag her. He steadied her. "Can you walk?" She looked toward the distant house, then down at the book in her arms. "I have carried coal heavier than this, Your Grace." Alexander's mouth tightened, not in amusement but in something near pain. "No," he said quietly, "you have not." Behind them the chapel door gave way with a crash. They ran into the dark, carrying Agnes Bell's hymn book, Rowena's letter, and the proof that the song which had silenced the crown was only the beginning. Chapter 5. The hymn book beneath his coat. By the time Martha Bell, Duke Alexander Sterling, and Mr. Reed reached the west wall of Sterling House again, The night had turned colder, and the great mansion no longer looked like a palace prepared for celebration, but like a fortress holding its breath. Light blazed in the ballroom windows, yet no music came from within. The laughter had died, the roses, the champagne, the silk gowns. The polished mirrors, all of it waited behind locked doors, while Martha stumbled through wet grass with Agnes Bell's hymn book pressed against her chest beneath Alexander's riding coat. Her lungs burned from the smoke in the gallery and the run from the chapel. Mud clung to her hem. A smear of ash crossed her cheek where rain had not washed it clean. Her body ached with every step. And shame, old and stubborn, rose in her even now because Alexander had twice steadied her by the arm and once caught her before she fell. She hated that the first thought through her mind had not been gratitude, but fear that he had felt the full weight of her. Yet he had not recoiled. He had not made the face others made. He walked beside her now with one hand near his pistol, his dark waistcoat torn at the sleeve, his fine boots ruined by mud, and his grey eyes fixed ahead with such cold fury that even Reed kept silent. When they reached the servants' entrance near the laundry yard, Alexander stopped and looked at Martha. "The book remains with you until we are before the envoy," he said. "Do not give it to anyone, not Mrs. Vale, not a footman, not even me unless you choose to." Martha looked up, startled by the last words. Alexander's face did not soften, but his voice lowered. "I have taken enough from you tonight by command." She did not know how to answer that. A servant's life was made of commands. No one asked whether she chose to carry coal, scrub blood from linen, eat last, sleep cold, stand in shadow, or swallow insult. Choice sounded almost dangerous, so she only nodded and said, "Yes, Your Grace." The moment they entered the West Passage, the house seemed to close around them. Footmen hurried toward them with wide eyes. A maid screamed when she saw blood on Reed's sleeve, though the wound was only a graze. Mrs. Vale appeared from the kitchen corridor like a black crow drawn by disaster, her face tightening when she saw Martha wrapped in the Duke's coat with something hidden beneath it. "Martha," she snapped. Before remembering Alexander stood beside her, she curtsied stiffly. "Your Grace, thank heavens you have returned. The guests are near rebellion. Lady Evelina has demanded explanations. And Lord Percival insists he is being slandered by a servant's fantasy." Alexander did not slow. "Then he will enjoy hearing the fantasy read aloud." Mrs. Vale's eyes flickered to Martha's chest. "Shall I take whatever she is carrying and have it cleaned or secured?" Martha's arms tightened around the hymn book. Alexander's gaze cut to the housekeeper. "You will not touch it." Mrs. Vale went pale. Clara, hovering behind her with two other maids, stared openly at Martha, and the hatred in her expression was almost childish in its wounded disbelief. Martha had entered the house as a kitchen drudge and returned under the Duke's coat, carrying evidence that every noble feared. To Clara, that was not justice. It was an offense against the order by which she had measured herself. "She is covered in mud," Clara whispered. "She will stain the carpets," Alexander heard. He turned so slowly that Clara wished at once she had swallowed the words, "If my carpets cannot survive the woman who may save my house, I shall burn them before dawn." No one spoke after that. Martha looked down, humiliated by the defense and warmed by it. Against her will they entered the supper room, where the guests had been gathered under guard. The transformation in the room was immediate. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks stopped above plates. Ladies in silk turned, their faces first offended by Martha's appearance, and then frightened by the object beneath Alexander's coat. Lady Evelina stood near the fireplace with Lord Percival and Countess Rowena, the three of them forming a small island of elegance and rot. Evelina's eyes fell at once to the coat around Martha's shoulders. Her mouth curved with such contempt that it was almost a smile. "How touching," she said. "The Duke lends his coat to the maid, and now we are all expected to pretend mud is martyrdom." Martha's cheeks burned, but she did not lower her eyes. The crown envoy rose from the head of the table. "You found the hymn book?" Martha stepped forward. Her hands shook as she unwrapped Alexander's coat from the oilcloth bundle. The old book appeared, small, worn, almost pitiful, beneath the chandeliers. Its cracked leather cover looked like nothing beside the jeweled snuff boxes, ivory fans, and crystal glasses surrounding it. Yet when Martha laid it on the table, every noble leaned back as if she had placed a pistol there. "This belonged to my mother, Agnes Bell," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "It was hidden beneath the altar stone at St. Bartholomew's Chapel. There is writing in the margins, names, numbers, and a letter." Countess Rowena's face did not change, but her hand moved once toward the pearls at her throat. Alexander saw it, so did the envoy. The envoy opened the hymn book with gloved care. The first pages were filled with musical notation, some of it ordinary, some of it marked in Agnes Bell's fine. Cramped hand, Martha stood beside the table, aware of every stain on her apron, every muddy inch of her skirt, every curve of her body beneath the room's gaze. But for the first time the shame did not rule her. The book lay open. Her mother had a voice again. The envoy read silently for several moments, then turned to Alexander's solicitor. Bring the ledger. The solicitor placed the estate accounts beside the hymn book. Alexander leaned over both. The room watched as the old song began to unlock the numbers. Page 7, line 2, 9th entry, Alexander said. The solicitor found it. Payment to Ashbury Relief Fund. The envoy followed Agnes Bell's notation. Next phrase. Page 4, line 6, 14th entry. Payment to Havers, the solicitor read. Authorized by Lord Percival Sterling. Percival stepped forward. Furious now, authorized for household services. You cannot twist every payment into crime because a dead chapel singer scribbled in a hymn book. Martha head lifted sharply. Dead chapel singer. Alexander moved before she could speak. You will refer to Agnes Bell with respect while her evidence is on my table. Percival laughed, but his face had gone damp. Your table? This is becoming theater. Cousin. A fat maid sings, a dead woman writes numbers. And suddenly you forget blood. Alexander's eyes went colder than Martha had yet seen them. Blood is precisely what I am remembering. The envoy turned another page. Agnes Bell's notes became clearer near the final anthem. There were names hidden beneath Latin syllables, each tied to deaths and sums. Ashbury Havers. P. Sterling, E. Blackthorne. At the last name the room shifted. Evelina went still. Martha looked at her, and Evelina looked back with a hatred so pure it seemed almost calm. My name appears in every invitation written tonight, Evelina said. It proves nothing. The envoy did not answer her. He lifted the folded letter Martha had carried in her bodice and broke the brittle seal. Martha's breath stopped. This was the paper addressed to Alexander's father, signed by Rowena Ashbury. The envoy read the first lines, then looked at Alexander. Your Grace. This letter warns the late Duke that false accounts were being prepared in his name. Alexander's face tightened. Read it aloud. Rowena stepped forward. No, the single word exposed more than panic could have. The envoy looked at her. Madam, Rowena recovered. Private correspondence between noble families cannot be read before servants. Martha almost smiled at the bitter absurdity of it. A servant had carried the letter through gunfire. Now nobles objected to her hearing what her mother had died to protect. Alexander said, read it. The envoy read. The letter was brief. But each sentence struck the room like iron. Countess Rowena had written years earlier to the late Duke claiming ignorance of certain transfers. Warning that Percival Circle was using the Ashbury Relief Fund to move money through false charitable channels, and asking for a private meeting at St. Bartholomew's Chapel. The final line made Martha's hands go cold. The singer Agnes Bell has heard too much of the anthem cipher. If she is not protected, they will destroy her name before they destroy her body. Silence followed. Not the shocked silence of society offended, but the deep, sick silence of people recognizing a grave being opened in public. Martha could not breathe all her life. Her mother had been a whispered shame. Agnes Bell, the chapel singer who had sung traitor songs. Agnes Bell, the foolish woman who meddled above her place. Agnes Bell. The woman whose daughter became a kitchen maid because no respectable house wanted the child of disgrace. Now the truth lay trembling in the envoy's hand, and Martha felt grief rise so violently that she gripped the table edge to remain standing. Alexander saw Martha, he said quietly. She shook her head once. Not here. She would not collapse before them. She would not give Evelina tears to enjoy. Percival seized on the only weakness left. A letter from Rowena warning my uncle proves she was loyal, not guilty. If anything, it condemns this servant's mother as the dangerous witness at the center of the affair. Rowena's head turned toward him with a flash of hatred. He had sacrificed her too quickly. The envoy noticed, Alexander noticed, Martha noticed both. Evelina moved closer to Percival, her voice low but clear. Percival, stop speaking. That was the wrong thing to say. Alexander looked at her. Why should he? Evelina's face hardened. Because you are turning grief and kitchen superstition into accusation. Because this room is tired. Because the crown's envoy is being manipulated by a servant who knows precisely how to look wounded. Martha stared at her. Evelina stepped closer, every inch of her beautiful body arranged for attack. Do not think I cannot see you, Martha Bell. You have stood in corners for years, watching your betters, learning where to lower your eyes, and when to tremble. Now you sing one old song. Clutch one dirty book and suddenly men call you brave, but you are not brave, you are ambitious, you are hungry, women built like you always are. A cruel murmur tried to rise. But it died under Alexander's stare. Martha's face burned, yet her voice when it came was calmer than she expected. Yes, my lady, I have been hungry. Evelina smiled as if she had won. Martha continued, hungry enough to know the difference between bread and silver words, hungry enough not to waste truth when it is finally set before me, if that makes me ambitious. Then perhaps ambition is not the sin you think it is. The servants along the wall looked at Martha as if seeing her for the first time. Clara looked away. Alexander turned to read. Search Lord Percival's rooms. Percival barked. You have no right, the Crown's envoy said. I give him the right. Percival's face drained. Read, and 2 guards left immediately. Rowena sat down, her strength finally showing cracks. Evelina remained standing, but the hand holding her fan trembled. Alexander looked from one to the other. While we wait, Miss Bell will sing the final cipher again, and my solicitor will mark every corresponding entry. Martha stiffened. She had sung once under shock, once under command. To sing again before those who hated her felt like walking willingly back into fire. Alexander saw the hesitation and came closer, lowering his voice so that only she could hear. You may refuse. Martha looked at him, startled. The old reflex rose. Servants did not refuse dukes. But he had said it plainly. You may refuse. She looked at the hymn book, at her mother handwriting, at the letter that had restored Agnes Bell from scandal to witness. No, Martha said. I will sing. Alexander stepped back, not taking credit for her decision. The envoy nodded. Martha sang. This time her voice did not tremble at the beginning. It rose low and clear over the supper room, over the uneaten dishes, over the candles burning down in their silver sticks, over nobles who had no language for the power of a woman they had dismissed. She sang the anthem not as entertainment, not as apology, but as testimony. The solicitor marked each phrase. The envoy called out numbers. Alexander matched them to ledger lines. Payment to Havers, payment to Ashbury Relief Fund, private courier to Calais, alteration of household accounts, purchase of forged seal, retainer to false witnesses. Then came a phrase Martha had never fully understood. A pause her mother had insisted must be held exactly 3 beats before the final descent. The envoy counted, frowned, and turned 3 pages backward instead of forward. Alexander followed, then stopped. His face changed. This entry concerns the old chapel trial, the solicitor read, voice shaking. Disbursement for testimony against Agnes Bell authorized under initials. Be every eye moved to Evelina Blackthorne. Evelina laughed. It was a beautiful sound and utterly false. I was a girl when Agnes Bell was accused. The envoy looked at the date. You were 19, a girl, Evelina repeated, though the word had lost its force. Alexander's voice was quiet, old enough to pay for a lie. Evelina's face twisted. I paid for information. Your father was being embarrassed by a chapel woman who knew too much and sang too freely. My family wished to protect the dignity of Sterling House. Martha felt the room sway. You paid someone to call my mother a traitor? Evelina looked at her with open contempt. Your mother should have known that poor women survive by silence. Martha took 1 step forward. For the first time all night, anger broke through her stillness. Not loud, not wild, worse, controlled. She did know silence, my lady. She kept enough of it to protect the truth from people like you. Evelina's eyes flashed and died anyway. The words landed with such cruelty that even Percival looked away. Alexander moved in 1 stride. He stood between them, not because Martha had asked him to, but because something in him seemed unable to tolerate another word. Lady Blackthorne, he said, his voice soft enough to chill the room. Our understanding is ended, the guests gasped. Evelina went white. You would break with me before servants? No, Alexander said. I break with you before witnesses. She stared as if she did not understand. He continued. You paid to blacken the name of an innocent woman. Concealed a cipher connected to my family accounts, and tonight attempted to bury the only voice that could expose you. You will leave Sterling House under guard when the envoy permits it. And until then you will speak when questioned and not before. Evelina's fan fell from her hand. The sound was small, but it seemed to mark the collapse of an entire future. Martha felt no triumph. Only a strange, hollow ache. Her mother had been dead for years. No public disgrace could give her back. Reed returned before anyone could speak further. He carried a locked document case, a torn riding glove, and a small pouch of foreign coin found beneath Lord Percival's floorboard, he said. Percival lunged, but 2 guards seized him. Reed placed the case before Alexander. The key was in Mr. Havers' room, hidden in the bedpost. Alexander opened the case. Inside were copies of forged estate seals, letters bearing false signatures, and a small music sheet marked with the same altered anthem performed that evening. At the bottom of the sheet was a note in Haver's hand. Remove the witness line. If Bell's girl sings, have her dismissed before the envoy hears. The words struck Martha harder than any insult. Bell's girl, they had known who she was. They had kept her in the kitchen, mocked her, watched her, perhaps waiting to see whether the dead woman's song had survived in the daughter. Alexander read the note once, then again, and when he looked at Martha, the shame in his eyes was no longer hidden. "They used my order to silence you," he said. Martha answered quietly. "No, Your Grace. You gave the order, they used what was already there." The truth of it stood between them. Alexander could command guards, seal gates, end engagements, expose treason. And still he could not undo the moment he had cast her out before the crown. He bowed his head slightly, not enough for society to call it weakness, but enough for Martha to see it was meant for her. "Yes," he said, "I did." The apology was not complete, not yet, but it was no longer buried. The envoy closed the document case. "Lord Percival Sterling will be held for examination. Lady Blackthorne will remain under guard. Countess Ashbury will answer for the fund and the letter's concealment. Miss Bell, your mother's hymn book is now evidence of the crown. But given its personal nature, it will remain in your custody until morning under protection." Martha's arms went around the book again. "Thank you, sir." The envoy's stern face softened by the smallest degree. "Your mother served the truth at great cost. Tonight, so have you." The room did not applaud. It would have been indecent, but the silence was different now. It no longer crushed Martha. It made space around her. She stood in the Duke's supper room, still muddy, still heavy, still wearing a stained servant's dress, still smelling faintly of coal beneath the roses. Nothing about her had been transformed into the delicate shape society approved. Yet every person there understood that the fate of nobles had turned on her memory, her courage. And her song. Mrs. Vale looked as if she had swallowed ashes. Clara stared at the floor. Evelina, guarded and shaking, whispered with venom, "This is not over." Martha heard her and knew she was right. Public ruin made people dangerous, especially people who believed humiliation belonged only to servants. Alexander heard it too. His eyes moved to Evelina, then Percival, then the sealed doors. "No," he said, "it is not." Before dawn, the envoy ordered separate rooms secured for questioning. Percival was taken away first, struggling and cursing Alexander's name. Rowena followed with cold dignity. But her hands had aged 10 years in one night. Evelina passed Martha last. For one moment she stopped close enough that the guards tensed. Her voice dropped to a whisper meant only to wound. "He may defend you tonight, but do not mistake scandal for affection. Dukes do not marry coal smoke." Martha held the hymn book tighter. The words found their mark because they echoed fears already living in her. Alexander stood across the room, speaking to the envoy, and did not hear. Martha did not answer. Evelina smiled faintly, pleased by the silence, and allowed the guards to lead her away. When the room had emptied of guests, only Alexander, Martha, the envoy, Reed, and the solicitor remained. The candles had burned low, wax spilled down silver sticks, the white roses were browning at the edges from heat. Somewhere below stairs, the kitchen fires still breathed. Martha swayed slightly before she could stop herself. Alexander stepped forward at once, but stopped short of touching her. "You need rest." Martha almost laughed. Rest was a word used by people who expected beds to be warm and work to wait. The kitchen will need clearing. Alexander's face hardened, not at her, but at the life that made the answer natural. "You will not return to the kitchen tonight." She looked at him then, confused and wary. "Then where am I to go?" A simple question, but it silenced him. She had no proper place in the house now. Not among guests, not below stairs, not in the corridor, not beside him. The envoy, perhaps kinder because he was less entangled, said, "A guarded sitting room will do until morning." Martha nodded. "As you say, sir." Alexander removed his ruined coat from the table and noticed the mud on its hem, the ash from the chapel, the faint print of Martha's fingers where she had clutched it around the hymn book. He folded it slowly. "Miss Bell," he said. She paused at the door. "Yes, Your Grace." He seemed to choose each word with care. "Tomorrow, before the entire household, I will correct what I made them believe about you tonight." Martha's eyes held his. "You cannot correct it all in one morning." "No," he said. "But I can begin." She gave no smile, no forgiveness, no easy warmth, only a tired, steady nod. Then she followed Reed toward the guarded sitting room with her mother's hymn book against her heart. Behind her, Alexander remained in the ruined supper room among melted candles and dying roses. Reading again the note that proved his enemies had feared Bell's girl long before he had known her name. For years he had trusted suspicion more than mercy. Tonight suspicion had found treason. But mercy, the mercy he had denied a coal-stained maid at his own ball, had carried the truth back through smoke, mud, and gunfire. He looked toward the door where Martha had vanished and understood with a cold certainty that the conspiracy was not finished. Havers was still loose. Percival would not fall quietly. Evelina's pride would curdle into revenge, and Martha Bell, the woman everyone had dismissed because of her apron, her hands, and her body, now stood at the center of a danger that would not end with one exposed ledger. The hidden song had silenced the Crown's doubts for one night. By morning it might awaken every enemy in England.